Welcome to the first reading in the Barbara and David Zalaznick reading series. And I want to especially thank those two for sponsoring the series. More than 60 years ago, in 1952, the great Caribbean writer Wilson Harris set down this challenge. It is extremely important that certain bold assessments be made fearlessly by West Indian writers. Tiphanie Yanique, who was born in St. Thomas, the Virgin Islands, is a unique fulfillment and extension of Harris's challenge. She is a revelation of an underwritten part of the Caribbean. Islands enclosed in tourist brochures, islands peripherally American, outsiders' fetish, islands that her superior imagination and elegant prose have given true depth. Her debut collection, How to Escape from a Leper Colony, which has won much critical praise, dwells in the dangerous mercurial play of opposites, where characters are not so much in search of their identity, for that is chimera, but where characters are already too much themselves and are threatened by the fiction of history, of dissolving into a tragic feeling of dispossession. I take special joy and pride and special envy in the effortless portraitures that Yanique lift into the marvelous real. Land and people intertwined, voice and sea wedded, myth reduced to the ordinary scansion of breathing. By reduced, I mean in this context, heightened. When you read her, you want to do so out loud, both because of her delicious poet's ear for vernacular and the bewitching sense of a spell being cast in her cresting syntax. Science is just a kind of magic, and magic just a kind of religion, and Owen Arthur knows also about this because Owen owns a ship, and men who spend their lives on water know that magic is real. That sentence is early in her epical first novel, Land of Love and Drowning, and it is just one example, a small one, of the limitless radiance of the cadence of the open sea, the subterranean melody accumulating to a delightful, devastating end in that book. One of the bold assessments Yanique has fearlessly made in her work is to keenly observe the post-lapsarian in paradise, to render the anguish of a drug-dealing Adam, the travails of a young pregnant Eve, and expose the unsubtle serpent called the United States, all of which works fearlessly to manifest, as the splendid end of one of her stories declares, the divine risk of love. Her writing has won many awards, including the Bocas Prize for Caribbean Fiction, Boston Review Prize in Fiction, Arona Jaffe Foundation Writers Award, a Pushcart Prize, and an Academy of American Poets Prize. These are but the beginning accomplishments of a writer who bears the mark of posterity. Tiphanie.
Good evening. Thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you to Sarah for making it possible for me to find my backside up here. For a second, I wasn't sure if I was going to make it. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you. Thank you to Professor Ishion Hutchinson for the introduction, but also just for being my friend and for inviting me. And to everyone else in the department who made it possible. Thank you to Lanray and to Lauren for escorting me around today. And to the students I met with earlier. You guys were really fucking awesome. This novel is a work of fiction, but it is based somewhat on my family story. When my great-grandfather was a young man, he went down with his ship. And his ship was a very important ship in the Virgin Islands. It was such an important ship that it was said at the time that when that ship went down, every family in the Virgin Islands lost somebody. So my family lost him, and soon after our family lost his wife. And my grandmother, who was their youngest child, was orphaned. And that's the story really, not only of my family, but it's really a Virgin Islands story. And it's one of the stories that is in our history books and is probably the most consistent story. At the same time that this ship went down, the Virgin Islands was also being bought by the United States and transferred from Danish to American rule. So for me, those two things always seem to be the same kind of thing. What happened to my family, the loss of the patriarch, and then what happened really to my islands, the change of patriarchy, so to say. I'm going to start by just reading from the opening, the introduction, and then I'll skip around and read from somewhere else. And I'm going to read for a while, like your grandma. So you can just like sit back and relax and pretend there's like rum. Owen Arthur Bradshaw watched as the little girl was tied up with lace and silk. He jostled the warm rum in his glass and listened to the wind. The storm outside wasn't a hurricane, just a tropical gale. It was the season for storms. Lightning slated through the heavy wooden shutters that were closed but unfastened. The thunder was coming through the walls built with blue bitch stone. There was no one outside walking in the rain. That sort of thing was avoided. A scientist visiting from America had brought the lace and the silk. They were all at the house of Mr. Lovenkrant, an eminent Danish businessman. Denmark was giving up on the West Indies and America was buying in, but Mr. Lovenkrant was not leaving. The scientist was tying the girl up. He was demonstrating an experiment that had become stale on the continent, an experiment of electricity. The little girl was very beautiful, and she was very little, and she was very afraid. She was also very brave. Captain Bradshaw thought on his daughter, Iona, who was not unlike this little American girl. Only Iona was more beautiful and at least as brave. The people who had come together to make Captain Owen Arthur could be traced back to West Africans forced to the islands as slaves, and West Africans who came over free to offer their services as goldsmiths, back to European men who were kicked out of Europe as criminals, and to European women of aristocratic blood who sailed to the islands for adventure, back to Asians who came as servants and planned to return to their Indies, and to Asians who only wanted to see if there was indeed a western side of the Indies, and to Caribs who sat quietly making baskets in the countryside, plotting ways to kill all the rest and take back the land their God had granted them for a millennium. Owen Arthur had been raised from a poor upbringing to a place of importance and ownership. He was the captain and owner of a cargo ship, and now he was among these important men who sat in this living room and watched through the haze of the oil lamps as a girl was hoisted off the ground via lace and silk and a hook in the ceiling. The little girl's body jerked as a scientist tugged. Her body jerked until she was a few feet off the ground, but she did not cry out. Owen Arthur was not sure how much longer he could bear to watch, but it was essential for him to be at this gathering. The host, Mr. Lovenkrant, was a rum maker, and Owen Arthur had always shipped rum. But with Americanness would come prohibition, and Owen Arthur needed to ensure he was included in any of the non-liquor endeavors. He pressed his own earlobe between his thumb and forefingers. Success and solvency should have been on his mind, but Owen Arthur could not help but watch the American girl with a father's tenderness. This little girl was pale-faced and blonde, and Owen's little girl, Iona, was honey-skinned and ocean-haired. But still he looked at this strange little girl as though looking at his own child. The first half of him desired that he had created this child. Oh, she was a pretty yellow thing. The lower half of him desired the child. How young could she be? He put his mouth to his glass and tilted it until the warm sweetness met his lips. She will outlive me, he thought to himself. And who was this she he was referring to? Perhaps his wife, who was just then sitting at home doing the sewing it seemed God had created her to do? Or perhaps he was speaking of his mistress, who was at that moment sitting in her home playing the piano that he had bought her, making a music that only God or the devil could bless. Or perhaps he was actually speaking of his daughter, whom he loved like he loved his own skin. Perhaps he was speaking of this little girl to whom the scientist was now attaching cords of metal. Perhaps this little girl was, in a way, all woman to him, as all women might be to a certain kind of man. Owen Arthur is right. All these she's will outlive him, though he cannot bear the thought of his women going on. He knows his daughter will live forever in the way all parents do, simply because parents generally die first. But Owen will not die of old age. Owen will die of love. And the Danish West Indies will become the United States Virgin Islands. This patriarch will die, and perhaps these things are the same thing. Behold, the American is saying in his strange accent. His hands give the girl the glass ball, and then he whispers to her, "Do not drop it, or I will punish you." She does not make a move to suggest that she has heard. She only takes the glass ball in both her hands, and then the first miracle happens. Her hair begins to rise, and the storm outside begins to howl. Christ have mercy. This is what the Christians whisper. The Jewish and Muslim men for whom these islands have been a refuge mutter, Oi Gatinu and Allah Akbar under their breaths respectively. Yes, America will bring us progress. Here is progress before us. Lightning claws through the window as though hunting, and Owen Arthur watches the girl's hair rise toward the ceiling until it is sticking up like so many angel horns. Oh, the story these men will tell of this night. How they will embellish one part and shrink the other. How they will make this night real again and again, some in Arabic or Danish or Yiddish or English, others in that Caribbean language that the tourist guidebooks will call Creole. The story will become more real than the night itself because the story of it will last, while this wet night will soon be over. And here we all are, putting it down so that it may last forever. But Owen Arthur thinks on his firstborn, his only child thus far who has survived to life, his honey-skinned Iona. Her hair, too, has a life of its own. He has combed it himself and knotted it into braids and found that he can get lost in its forest. He collects the pieces of her hair from the brush and burns them himself so that no one can steal them and put a curse on her. Owen himself is not a hairy man. He does not even sport the sideburns so popular from men of this time and place. His daughter has the glorious hair on her head, but otherwise she too is smooth all over. Iona is so beautiful that many call her pure and think on the virgin hills, or they call her pristine and they think of the clear and open ocean, or they might use terms such as untouched or undefiled, but then they are cautious because they know that their words alone might spoil her. So on damp nights, men may imagine that they are angels and touch her as they please, but when they wake, they sign themselves with the cross, and if available, they pat handfuls of holy water on their chests. They do not wish to pollute little Iona. They only wish to witness a bit and then return like a tourist might. The American scientist takes the ball from this other little girl in this parlor, and now he prepares for the real triumph. He will make the little girl into a miracle. The scientist raises the vial to the little girl's face. The little girl is wise, as little girls must be. She does not flinch, but she closes her eyes. The scientist touches the vial to her nose. White lights spark like lightning about her face. She cries out, but the men clap louder. They have seen electricity. They have seen the future. Mr. Lovencrant, the scientist says, you must try. The vial is passed to the man of the house who has been standing near a window that is fastened but not sealed, the legs of rain kicking at his back. He steps forward and with great hesitation that might be called trepidation were he not a wealthy man, he presses the vial to the brave girl's nose. He feels the shock in his hand and up his wet sleeve and lurches away. Mercy, he exclaims, so loudly that no one hears the little girl cry out again. His face is hot. For a moment he thought he would be paralyzed, but no, he had survived. Owen feels the rain sneaking through as kisses from a tiny mouth. And now he raises his hand. I should like to try, he says. The American scientist smiles as Owen Arthur steps forward. He passes Owen the vial. Owen walks toward the little girl. She is suspended so that he and she are level and their eyes meet. He bends toward her and caresses her earlobe gently, for he so enjoys the feeling of that soft skin. Men are foolish when pretty girls are involved, he says, loud enough for all to hear. And then he dashes the vial onto the floor. The great men snort. Many look away ashamed that they had not had Captain Bradshaw's integrity. My apologies, Mr. Lovencrantz. I seem to have broken the American's instrument. I'm afraid I've ended the game. Owen thinks on the shipping deals he surely has lost. Thinks on how his business has depended on Lovencrantz rum for more than a decade, but then he thinks on something else. I fear it's past this girl's bedtime. He touches the girl's hair, then tips his hat and takes his leave into the storm. Science is just a kind of magic, and magic just a kind of religion, and Owen Arthur knows all about this because Owen owns a ship, and men who spend their lives on water know that magic is real. And Owen stands in the rain, the lightning brightening the way ahead of him. Lovencrantz house, so well positioned at the center of town, is not far from the opening of the sea. Wherever Owen goes, the sea will be at his side either way. A wall of stone has been built to block the bay, so it is no longer really a beach, but a proper harbor. Still, it would be nothing at all for Owen to walk to that ocean right now. He has done it before. The waves are bounding. The ocean, look now, is coming to him. The waves filling over the seawall, leaping like animals, like little girls. So when the ship went down, my grandmother was orphaned along with all her siblings. She was the youngest, she was 3. And for a while, it wasn't clear what was going to become of them. The family was incredibly wealthy because of the ship captain. But once the captain went down, the family lost its wealth almost overnight. It turned out that there was debt, as is often the case, and without the bread owner, there was no one to fulfill the debt. And so the family was really plummeted into poverty. I grew up actually with very, very little means. My grandmother raised me. And she was an incredibly strong person. She was a storyteller. She was a librarian, actually, which is probably why I ended up being a writer, I'm sure. And I was always fascinated by how she, who had been orphaned at 3, lost both her parents by the age of 5, how she survived, how she made it. She was like this incredibly positive person. And she never seemed to have any negativity about her upbringing. So I decided I would incorporate her as a character into the novel too. And Annette, who is one of my main characters and one of my narrators, is based somewhat on her. And this is Annette. Don't mind I's a picnic. I still old enough to ascertain what the ass going on. Sometimes my sister Iona leave me with any old neighbor when she go on her outings. Ride that burro side saddle like it's a steed. The neighbor's kind enough, but they don't claim me. They feed me a little dumpling if I hungry. They give me a pot and a stick to pong if I bored, but they don't love me. And though I can't say how I know about love. I know my sister's supposed to love me. She the only one supposed to. I know whatever else I get is by grace. Now, Iona think that because I a child, I deaf and blind. When she went go buy the ticket for St. Croix, where they have an orphanage, she take me with she because there was no neighbor to throw me by. I hear she say my name and not her own. 1 ticket. And I hear she called me Annette Stem, and not my true name, Annette Bradshaw. Even though I don't know person one with the name Stem, but I know enough that I go in someplace and Iona ain't accompanying me. And when I gone, I ain't gonna be her sister no more. Different last name, gonna change that up just so. So see me, since ticket buy, I trying bad to be good. Earning my stay, I sweeping the floor. I only eating a little bit of food, so she don't worry about feeding me. I squeezing tight to the edge of the bed, so she don't feel like I inconveniencing her sleep. I barely sleeping at all. I keep to the corners of the flat when she's sewing so I don't disturb. I even leave the flat and walk about, float sticks in the gutter with the other wild children. See, I staying out of the flipping way. But Iona, she's still sending me. I know the day reach when she pull a cloth bag with clasp underneath the bed. It's something fancy like it belonged to our mama, and it's swell up with clothes, and I know it's for me. I sit down and I watch Iona stir up the soursop tea. And after I drink that, I was so soursopped I could have walked on water. It to calm me, keep me from saying my true name or from harassing the situation like what they give children nowadays when they go on airplanes. But you ain't know me. No matter what the poison I been given, I still ain't getting on nobody boat. I know boats mean I heading to dead like my papa. The soursop have me stupefied, and that have me stupid enough to start up a wailing when we get near the boat. I dead and don't let me dead. Iona look around like she going to shrivel up with shame. Her hand trying to cover my mouth to hush me. We ain't even right up at the boat and already I bazadi. She gripping me like I is a wild animal but looking around the whole time to see who it is seeing. Is then I realize that throwing me away ain't just a secret from me, but from everybody. So I really get to work then. I bawling about my own impending death so loud and so intent that I start believing my own self. The captain himself had to come out and tell Iona that I can't board unattended if I carrying on so. And since this man is a captain, he know we, and he call we by we true name. And so now, if they didn't know before, everybody waiting for the boat know that the very Iona Bradshaw attempting a sending off of his sister to St. Croix and what the hell that could mean. The captain's wife come on and watch me in my face. The child is sick, she say. And though she say it tough, it have a gentleness. But Iona recover fast. She's going to family doctors, a family of doctors on St. Croix. The wife shakes she head and step back. The child is likely contagious. Let me tell you, when that ship blare, I, Annette Bradshaw, am slumped on the dry dock watching the ship push off. Iona is standing watching it as though as a man she loved pulling away from she. But I have something else going on that Iona ain't catch us yet. I sick for true. There on the dock, my skin blazing like I have a fever. My eyes them watering, but it ain't water. It's something thick like it's going to blind me. Iona march home and don't even watch behind to see if I follow in. I only stumbling behind her, wondering how to ask I do this. I say I dead in, and look now, I dead in. The next morning, I wake up on the floor, but I only know it's the floor because I feeling it hard and cold. My eyes them seal shut like with a paste. My sister don't call no doctor or take me to no hospital, but a neighbor woman come. This a woman from Jos Van Dyke, same side of the VI, the British that our mama from. And everybody know that this woman sweet on other woman like how a woman supposed to sweet on man. So she ain't afraid of Iona beauty. She fancy Iona. She thinks she doing Iona a favor when she come by the flat. But even she quick make the pronouncement. Fever to the bone. Mucus stuffing every membrane. And yes, it's true. I dead in. I about to dead any blooming minute. Or maybe it might take a month, but I head in there. The Spanish influenza, she say, crash herself and back out the room, contagious, no lie, and kill anyone it kiss. But me, I live. And I know it's not no Spanish flu that near machete me. It's me, the machete. It's my own self saying something and then making it so. And no doctor ain't heal me. It's me. I there spending days and then weeks telling myself that I going to live. Iona have me worse than a leper, but that mean I get the bed all to myself while she sleep on the settee in the outer room. And while she waiting for me to die, she still have to water me. And that Yo Spandex woman still come looking for Iona and bring me broth. So I sustained enough to keep my thinking clear. I going to love and be loved, and it's going to be all right, because those who to love me won't, but someone will, and he coming if you just stay alive, Annette. So is my thinking almost kill me, and is my thinking save me? But let me tell you, all that power, it scare me. Speak and make it so is an easy magic for mistakes. I live, but I come careful. I live to not wish death on a soul for years and years, until I meet a man who loved me like a tsunami, and I would swim to get to the deepest point and drown myself in him. Thank you. And now you ask questions.
Yes.
How many brothers and sisters did your grandmother have?
She was number 8.
So they kind of raised her kids.
It was complicated. The eldest was married already and was starting his own family. The eldest daughter was in college, and she actually left college to raise the younger girls. But she lost a lot by doing that. I mean, she did end up, the eldest daughter, finishing college, but it was a long journey for her. And then my grandmother didn't do college in the more traditional way. She did end up going to college, getting her master's. It was a big deal for a black woman at the time. But she did it with her children. She was in undergrad and grad school with both her daughters. So my grandmother was raised in part by her elder sister. But I found out recently, when I was just randomly doing some research in Puerto Rico, I knew that my grandmother and one of my uncles, one of her brothers, my great uncles, had lived in Puerto Rico on a farm for many years. And that was just a story that I knew, that they had lived many years on this farm. And I wanted to see the farm, because my grandmother had always said that this was a cherished childhood. And we've been to Puerto Rico many times, but we never gone to the farm. So I thought I'm going to go visit this farm now that my grandmother has passed on. She passed away about 4 years ago. And so I went on this journey to visit this farm. And Puerto Rico is a funny place. I didn't know anything about the farm. I just knew the name of the owners of the farm. One woman named Liz and one woman named Kelly. I had first names, Kelly and Liz. A farm in this one area called Vega Baja. So I went to Vega Baja and I just started saying, I'm looking for the farm with Liz and Kelly. And people started just giving me directions. Down here in Spanish, my Spanish is pretty poor. But as I got closer, people would say, the place where they kept all the kids. And I'd be like, okay, sure. And as I got closer, people just started to reveal more, you mean the orphanage. And I didn't know, my grandmother had never said that she had been in an orphanage. But it turned out that place in Puerto Rico was actually an orphanage, not just for Puerto Ricans and Virgin Islands, but for Caribbean children from all over the region who had lost their parents for various reasons. And these two women, Liz and Kelly, kept this orphanage. They also kept a hospital. They kept a farm. And my grandmother had been raised most of her childhood there. So yeah, her story is very complex. And that's not part of the novel, but maybe the next one.
Did you have a preconceived notion of what the structure of it would be and then execute that, or did you write your way into figuring it out, and did you end up having to revise it and change it as you went along? Like, I'm curious about your process and how it relates to
the structure. I love structure. I think it's a lot of fun. I think that might be because my first training as a writer was as a poet, and poets generally dig structure. Yeah, we're like, a sonnet, yeah. So I really like structure, and I like creating new ideas of structure in my fiction. But I also wanted structure that was meaningful. I didn't want structure that my story was serving the structure. I wanted to make sure that my structure was serving the story. So one of the things I knew early on with this novel was that it was going to be a novel of a family and of a place. Maybe one way to think about the Virgin Islands is that it's a nation, a colonized one. But I wanted to write a story about entire people, Virgin Islanders. And to me, that seemed to demand artistically and politically that I tell it from different voices. And I think this was a moment that I think many writers come to when you realize that politics and craft often and maybe always go together. And I knew that it was a political decision to allow the people, the very different kinds of people, to speak on their own behalf. But it was also a craft decision. I felt that it would do the most work of actually demonstrating this sort of overall thing that I wanted to demonstrate. And also it would be fun to try and do. And to test out my own skills. Can I write from the perspective of Annette, who grows up after the family has lost its money and so speaks in the patois, versus Iona, the older sister who grew up very genteel and speaks a very genteel British English, or their younger brother who sort of goes in between the two. I thought that would be a challenge, but also it was politically the truth about what it meant really to be a Virgin Islander. Unlike, I think, many other Caribbean locales that are independent and are their own, at least politically, their own nations, the Virgin Islands is not, right? So Virgin Islanders grew up code switching, the linguistic term for being able to speak your standard English and your vernacular. So most Virgin Islanders do both very easily. But at the time of this novel that I was writing, that was just beginning to happen, so that there would be Virgin Islanders who spoke purely in the vernacular, some who spoke purely in standard, and some who were just beginning to transition and hold both at the same time. So it all felt just very politically sort of true. The omniscient narrator also changes throughout the novel. So the omniscient narrator, as I read in the beginning, starts out very standard English. And as the omniscient narrator sort of develops or progresses in her understanding of her role as the grand storyteller, she begins to change the way that she tells the story. And all of that was like fun, crafty stuff, but was also definitely political too.
Did you think, I'm going to do it this way, I'm going to have this sort of evolving omniscient narrator, or was it a thing that just started to happen and you realized kind of needed to happen in order to write the book?
Omniscient is sort of my most natural way to write, actually, even though when I know a lot of, like, from what I know, like, people often talk about my work as being very first person, and that's what people think I'm good at. But my natural tendency is towards the omniscient. So actually the omniscient narrator came first, and I've had to, over the course of my writing life, really like sharpen my skills at the first person. I think now I'm good at it, but I wasn't good at it in the very beginning. So the omniscient narrator was really first. But I also think the more I thought about narrator, I realized that all narrators are really first-person narrators. At least is the way that I understand it. That all narrators have a persona, have a positioning, have an angle of vision as they examine the text. Even the God omniscient narrator has a position. And once I figured that out, then I also realized that my omniscient narrator was a she, and actually was many she's, and was sort of like the voice of the Virgin Islands. At one point, the omniscient narrator names herself the old wives of the island. And I think I realized that as I was writing it, that those were the people that could tell the story, that they were the gods of the place. In the back.
Hi.
Hi.
You kind of answered the question a little bit towards the end, but you mentioned at the beginning that the family lost its patriarch and the Virgin Islands lost its patriarchy. And I'm wondering if in your book you sort of gender both of those problems and those losses.
I do. This book took me a really long-ass time to write. And I think during the course of that more than a decade of writing, I realized that I wanted to write a novel that did examine issues of gender and race and ethnicity and environmentalism. I wanted to do a whole heap of shit. And because it took me so long, I actually could. Because I had practiced a lot of particular skills. I think I was able to pull off doing a lot of stuff in the novel. So, yeah, I am sort of thinking about the patriarch as the papa, and what that means to lose that, and particularly what it means for girls to lose that. The two primary subjects of the novel are Iona and her sister Annette, and they respond to those losses in radically different ways. And I wanted to examine, what happens when you lose the father, what happens when you lose your country, or at least your father country. How do you figure out who you are? How do you figure out who you belong to? How do you figure out what belongs to you? And of course, there are as many different ways as there are people, but I think by having two sisters who were very different in age, Iona is almost 18 when her sister is born, they were able, I think I was able to achieve an example of radically different ways that particularly girls respond to those losses.
Any more? Give Tiffany a big hand.
Thank you, guys.